Welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Nathan and I'm a 5th year medical student at UCL. This is my 9th vlog, and this vlog will be about how to go about choosing your medical school. I'm doing this vlog because I remember when I was applying to medical schools, choosing which medical school I wanted to go to was a very hard decision. But before I share my experience and my tips about how to go about choosing which medical school you should apply to, I do want to just say that regardless of which medical schools you choose and which one you end up at, they'll all allow you to become a great medical student and a great doctor. Okay, so there are currently about 40 odd medical schools in the UK. And how do you choose 4 of those medical schools? Well, I've come up with a number of tips which I think can help you. So firstly, I would say is to consider the location of the medical school. Location is important for many reasons. Firstly, financial. Of course, living in different parts of the country will lead to different living costs. So living in London will of course be significantly more expensive than living in other parts of the country. But at the same time, you have to think about location because of things that you want to do outside of medicine and the amenities available. So whilst London is probably more expensive in terms of accommodation than many other places, it does also have a lot to offer. For example, the West End shows and ability to go to prominent sports grounds and all that stuff. So do consider location from that perspective. Another thing on location is to consider how close you are to home. I know that some medical students really enjoy being quite far away from home. They like that independence. But others, including myself, like to be quite close to home. It means that for me personally, the commute to medical school is not that long, so I can easily go back if I'm free on a weekend. But also make sure that when I'm bringing my stuff to university at the start of term or at the start of the year, or taking things home, it's not actually such a hassle. I wouldn't want to imagine how long and how difficult it would be to just carry all the stuff I wanted to bring to my university accommodation from where I live to Edinburgh, which would be a massive trek. So do consider location when choosing your medical school options. My second point is to consider the style of learning that's offered by the medical schools. This is really important because different medical students and different students in general learn in different ways and prefer different ways of learning. So there are 2 main sort of different approaches that medical schools may use when it comes to teaching, which is the more traditional approach of preclinical learning. So the first 2 years at UCL is lecture-based learning, tutorials, and then the latter years, the 3rd, 4th and 5th year, or 4th, 5th and 6th year, depending on which medical school you're at, is clinical years, so when you're in hospital and you're actually seeing patients. Other medical schools, such as Birmingham and many others, have a more integrated approach. So from day 1, from the first year, you're going into clinical settings, you're going into hospital, you're going into GP. So depending on what type of exposure to patient sort of practice and the clinical side you are hoping for, do consider that when you're choosing your medical schools. Also, in terms of learning styles that medical schools use, some heavily favour the use of PBL. What is PBL? PBL is problem-based learning. So that's where you're given a case, you work through the case, say in groups, and you're expected to learn from going through those cases. Whereas other medical schools such as UCL use more of a lecture-based. So they give all of the information that you need to know in a lecture, in the lecture notes, and that's how you're expected to learn there. I'm not saying that the medical schools use one or the other, entirely. For example, at UCL, we definitely have used both PBL and lectures, but majority of learning at institutions tends to be favoured to one of those learning styles. So do consider what you'd prefer and where you think you'd fit in best. Another really interesting area to look at when choosing your medical schools is whether they offer an iBSc or whether the iBSc is compulsory. So what is an iBSc? An iBSc is an intercalated Bachelor of Science. Some medical schools such as Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial and UCL and maybe a few others make an iBSc compulsory. So you do your first 2 years of preclinical medicine, then you do a completely different degree for 1 year, and then you're back to medicine for your clinical years in year 4, 5, and 6. Other medical schools provide an option to do a BSc, and that maybe you have to apply for it, or only sort of a top certain percentage of the year can actually get into doing the BSc. Do really consider whether you want to apply to a university that makes it mandatory. I wasn't considering sort of this when I was applying to universities for medicine, but in hindsight, having done iBSc, I would have definitely have made sure that most of my places that I applied did make it a sort of mandatory part. I really enjoyed the iBSc. It provided a fresh perspective on both medicine and also just general learning. It was a completely different style of learning, and also provided a new experience as well. I had a lot more spare time. I was able to do a lot more society work, some paid jobs. So it did provide me with a lot of satisfaction, and I really enjoyed it. So definitely consider which university provides an iBSc or makes it optional, and whether you want to do one. It does add an extra year, so other colleagues at different universities will of course graduate before you, but I do really think that it was worth it. And finally, I would say the most important point to consider when applying to medical school is the entry requirements. So you have 40 odd medical schools. How to narrow them down? Well, of course, if you have stellar grades, you have top GCSEs and A levels, your UK CAT score is really high, then of course that prevents no barriers, and that's great. You can apply to most places. However, if you aren't that sort of at the top of all your GCSEs and A levels, you should really look at the minimum entry requirements of all these medical schools, because that will allow you to rule out some. So for example, if your UK CAT score is below a certain level, some medical schools have a threshold where they say they expect most applicants to get above this score. So if you're at that level or just below it, then maybe consider applying to other places. So use that to help you first differentiate which medical schools to apply for, because there's sometimes no point applying to places where you'll probably be rejected anyway. So you want to give yourself the best chance. Play to your strengths. So look at what medical schools are looking for in the application. Do they place more emphasis on the interview, more emphasis on your GCSEs, on your A levels, on your personal statement? Because that's really important as well. So for example, choosing between Cambridge and Oxford. And so Cambridge, of course, places more emphasis as a whole on the person and invites majority of the applicants, I think 80%, to interview, whereas Oxford is more selective and looks more at your GCSEs and your BMAT. So play to your strength, look at the entry requirements for each university and see which one you think you'll do the best at in the application. Okay, so these are 4 tips that I thought would be quite useful for myself if I was to go back to when I was applying, and hopefully you as prospective medical students. So what should you be doing now, considering these 4 things? You should be looking at the medical school's websites for the ones that you're particularly interested in. You should find out key information such as the entry requirements, the location, whether they have an iBSc or not, and sort of just all that key information that I went over, because that's really important, and you should list that down so that you can easily compare different universities and their different styles. Then I would strongly advise having a look at the area of the university. Of course, in COVID times, that would probably involve going to virtual open days, but also to maybe even watch videos on YouTube from the university, from areas about, for example, if you're looking into Bristol University, just type in Bristol City and I'm sure you can find videos on things to do in Bristol. So that would just give you a better idea of what the university is like, what the campus is like, what the city is like, and that would give you a better understanding of where you would want to go. But finally, and most importantly, I would say reach out to medical students. Find medical students who are going to institutions that you're interested in. You can find them, for example, if you have a careers staff member at your school, see if they have contacts of alumni from the school and contact them if they're medical students at the place you want to go. Otherwise, you can look on LinkedIn, just type in the medical school's name and you'll find loads of medical students on there. Send them a request and maybe a message saying that you're interested in going there, and I'm sure that majority of medical students will be more than happy to help you in providing information not just about choosing the medical school and their experience, but also further on in the application process, the interview and all that stuff. So I would highly recommend doing that. So I hope many of you have found this useful. It certainly would have helped me a lot had I sort of been equipped with these tips when I was applying, and hopefully you enjoyed this video. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next vlog.